kind of trying to ease myself into the moment. I'm so excited and I'm truly honored to be here. Breathe. Okay, that's so cool that I'm under so much pressure right now because that's exactly what I want to tell you about. Another time where I was under a lot of pressure, just like now. And so at that time, I was in my last year of college. And at that point, I was willing to put in a lot of effort in order to get that first job. I just wanted somebody to give me an opportunity to show that I can be a developer. And so I was under so much pressure when I was preparing for that job interview. But what was it all about? I'll tell you exactly what was the situation. I had 24 hours to create a project in Clojure, and I did not know Clojure at all. So how did I end up in this situation? How did I get that thing? So let's go back to an hour earlier. I got a call from Linda. She was from HR, and she said, "Hey, May, I'm so happy to tell you that you've moved on to the last part of the hiring process. And just one more thing. You mentioned that you've done a project in Clojure, right?" I did say that. I mean, they wrote it in the job description, and I wanted the job. I didn't want to lie, but I had no choice. And, I thought, okay, how hard could that be? And so I said, you know what, Linda, I don't have a project in Clojure yet, but I can get it done by tomorrow. And she said, great, see you tomorrow. Make sure you bring that project with you. Oh my God. Oh my God, what did I get myself into? Okay, back then, I did not know how I am going to do this. A project in Clojure in 24 hours? But today I know how to do this. And by the end of this talk, you will know how to do this too. So I believe that now is a good time to start the talk. So code, play, repeat. How to learn any programming language. But before I'll tell you all about it, let me introduce myself. So my name is BEISARON. I've been a backend developer for over 5 years. And today, for the past 3 years, I am a senior platform engineer at Forder. I'm an international public speaker, and I'm a mentor. I love helping other people become the tech speakers that they want to be. I am also a party girl. I love to join Diablo 4 parties. And I'm a huge Star Wars fan. If somebody missed my R2-D2 heels, now is the time to look and also clap. Come on, give it up. Yeah, take photos, everything. Those are painful. I deserve the cheering, right? So, all right, let's go back to the story because that's what we're here to talk about. I had 24 hours to create a project in Clojure. It's a functional programming language that I've never heard of before. So the first thing that I did was I went to the documentation. I started to set out the environment, and I started to, just learn a little bit about this language. And the next thing that I did, was just making sense that I'll go to watch a few Clojure tutorials. And I actually did find a few good Clojure tutorials. And so 3.5 hours later, I was not making any real progress. I mean, why? Okay, let me ask you all a question. So let's say I have a private plane. Okay, maybe if I had a private plane, I wouldn't be standing here, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but okay. Let's go back to the topic. Let's say I have a private plane. Would you board this plane if I told you that the pilot has watched great YouTube tutorials on how to fly a plane? But he has never actually tried to fly a plane. But they were great tutorials. Would you board this plane? Just raise your hand if you would. Oh, nobody's brave. So I believe that this example over here kind of makes it easy for us to understand that when it comes to programming or flying a plane, watching tutorials and reading documentation, that's just not enough. We need to get our hands dirty. And so at that point, I was not making real progress because I wasn't doing anything. And I was also super stressed, frustrated, and my anxiety levels went through the roof. And so just at this moment, and it was so perfect that it happened, the internet fell down. Yay! And so I did the reasonable thing to do, and I started playing the Google Dinosaur. It was so nice. And I had a lot of fun doing that because 40 minutes later, I got a really high score and a huge dopamine rush. And so I thought to myself, okay, that's it. I know what to do. Since I'm on the road to failure anyway, I might as well enjoy the ride. And so, from that moment on, for the rest of the night, I just had fun and still, was a little bit stressed. But this is what I walked into to the interview the next day. It's a Pac-Man game written in Clojure. More of those claps now, I think. And so let's talk about how I did this, because this is what we're here to talk about today. Now I'm going to tell you about the method. Okay, so this method that I'm going to talk about, it has 3 parts, and we're going to go over them one by one. So the first part is easy start. Now I have a question for everyone here in a show of hands. Who here is not familiar with Clojure at all? Not surprising, okay? So for those of you who do not know Clojure, who believe that they can come up to the stage right now and implement this game? Okay, again, not surprising. But now I have another question. Let's say we have that amazing, complicated cow game. It's a cow that is walking from side to side, and it's collecting apples. Okay, so let's say I show you a code written in Clojure of this game, and I would only ask you to change the string that defines the image of the cow. Even if you don't know Clojure, who thinks that they can do that? In a show of hands. Decent. Yeah, I expected that. And that's good, because that's exactly the first part of my method. The first part talks about easy start. And you start by finding a 2D game that doesn't have a lot of lines of code. And so that's the game that I found, the cow game written in Clojure. Now, especially for this talk, I found a few more repositories of 2D games, so you can try and do that, do this method with other languages. So we have the snake written in JavaScript. I also found snake in Python. And for the adventurous people in the crowd, I found Tetris in MATLAB. So go ahead and try. I dare you. But now we're about to talk about the cow game, so let's go back to that. And that's the code that I'm going to show you from now on. So after we found a 2D game written in the language that we want to learn, what we're going to do is we'll start changing easy things like images or colors, just changing strings. So let's take a look at these 2 functions written in Clojure. Now, the first function that we have over here is called spawn apple. Now, even if you're not familiar with Clojure, I believe that it should be fairly easy for you to understand what's going on here. You can see that we have an X value and a Y value that are being defined, and then we can see that it says apple PNG. And we can all guess that this is where the apples are being defined, and this is where the image of the apple is also defined. So then, if we take a look at the other function, now it's not as easy to understand, but remember, that's not what we're trying to do at this point. What we're trying to do at this point is just change the strings. We don't care about the rest of the function yet. So we found the background image and we found the player image, which is currently a cow. And now I'm going to change all of those strings to something, whatever, something else. So I changed the apples to Space Invader monsters, and I found Stars Sky, and I found an image of an astronaut, and I cropped it in a very ugly way. And I didn't even remove the background. You can see that these are stolen from Google, right? So now I just have an astronaut that can only move from one side to another. And then, what happens if I walk into the interview and I would be like, hey, I found this repository written in Clojure, and I changed the strings. Hire me. So I guess that's not enough, which is why we need to move on to the next part. So the next part would be change, learn, repeat. And in this part, I'm going to talk about how we can develop better understanding through changing small things and then do it in a gradual difficulty. So let's see an example for changing things in a gradual difficulty. The first thing that we're going to do right now is to change the movement of the player in the game. So, okay, if we take a look at the update player position function, which I guess, this is where we update the position of the player in the game. So even if we don't know Clojure and we dive into the function, we can see that this is where we define new x, and then we have like the right and left. So if I want to, get the player to also move around in the y-axis, I can either just start changing this code and edit that and just get it to work without truly understanding what's going on here. But what another possibility for me to do is go back to the documentation and read about the case function, or start to read about, how do I assign value in Clojure. And after I read about it in the documentation, I go back to the code, and now when I start implementing things, I do that out of understanding because I'm using the documentation, in a goal-oriented way. If you just go to the documentation and you read, aimlessly, it can last forever. But if you have a goal, if you have a question that you want to ask, and you find the answer in that documentation, you go back to your code, the result will be a much better, coding skills. So now we edit the code to have also movement in the y-axis. So you can see that we have case, direction, up, down. And so now our amazing astronaut can also go up and down in the screen. But that's still not enough because we said, change, repeat, change, learn, repeat. So that's what we're going to do. So we did a first change, changing the movement, and now we're going to do the next change. We're going to add different items. And also, we can start by adding screen boundaries. I don't want my player to just disappear. I want my player to stay in the boundaries of the screen. So now, if we look at this, the next step of my game, remember, my game started from a cow in the field collecting apples. Now we have a Pac-Man that can walk around the screen in 4 directions. And I also changed the layout of the items, the collectible items in this game. And in order to be able to do that, I needed to learn about iterations in Clojure. I needed to learn about conditional operators. I needed to learn about data structures. And it wasn't that simple. It looks stupid, but I guarantee you it wasn't a simple thing to do, to turn that Apple game into this. And so those small iterations, it meant a lot for me because I had small successes every time. And with each success, I gained more and more motivation. You know, this motivation, it's everything. When you work because you want to, I guarantee the result would be much better. And so this brings me to the next step of my method, implement. Because after you gained, you gained knowledge and you learned a bunch of things, now it's time to put that knowledge into practice and to try and create something from scratch. And then when you start creating things from scratch, you might find yourself, dealing with some different edge cases that will require you to be more creative and put more effort into the code and understand, and try to understand the language even better and dive deeper. But you can't do that if you just start from the end. You still need to go through those steps in order to mentally be able do that implementation part. So that was the last part. That was the last version of my Pac-Man game. And even getting this done was not easy because over here I added the maze. That was the big thing that I worked on for most of the night. And at the end of this night, I was able to walk into that interview and talk about this game that I wrote in Clojure, and I did not know Clojure at the beginning of the night. By the way, I did not know Clojure at the end of the night too. But I don't think I know Clojure today, and I've been doing Clojure for quite some time. But I was able to talk about this code, explain what I did, and I was able to understand what's going on there. And that's the important part about this method. And so now, comes the question. OK, so it worked for you. Why? Why did it work, May? What's so different about this method? So I want to present to you the 70-20-10 learning model. Now, this model suggests a way to divide the time and effort you put into learning in the following way. Let's see. So this model suggests that you put the smallest amount of time in formal learning. This is what we talk about. This is what is called all of the reading documentation, tutorials, all of the passive learning. Do as little of that as possible. And then learning from others. Now, that's great because you can learn from others by observing their work. You can learn from others by getting feedback, by consulting other people. And I think most of the time should be put into on-the-job learning. And that's when you go ahead and you try to change small things and do things in a gradual difficulty. This is the majority of the time. This is where you need to put it when you try to learn a new thing, not just a programming language. And so if we go back to the 2D game method, we can see that it incorporates exactly those parts. So at the beginning, we have the formal learning where I started to set out the environment and read it through the documentation just to get a general understanding of what's going on in Clojure. And then after that, the learning from other parts is getting a code that is already written in Clojure. I see someone else's code, someone else's work. I learn from it. I observe it, but then I also start to play around with that code, and that's the on-the-job learning. I start to change small things, and this is how I gain better understanding of Clojure or any other language that I want to learn. And on-the-job learning, that's basically the entire method that I was just talking about. But now comes another question. I love asking questions. Comes another question. So, OK, why a 2D game? You can do all of those things that I talked about in in the company's repository. Why not do that? Now, I'm going to answer this question because I wrote the slide. So the 2D game learning method, I believe that it's a better way for learning programming languages because, first of all, if you join a new company and you try to learn the business logic of the systems, and simultaneously you're trying to learn the new language, this can be pretty overwhelming. But if you divide these two into two separate parts of your learning process, and you start with a 2D game that is simple enough so you don't need to understand the logic. I mean, what's there to understand? OK, it's Snake. He goes around the screen. Got it. But now your mind is free to concentrate on learning the language. So once you gain confidence over there, you can go back to the company repository and start to dive in. And so another thing about this method is that no matter how small the amount of code this game has, it will still consist most of the key concepts that are needed in order to learn a new programming language. You will have loops, conditionals, data structures, threading, and the beauty in this method is that you can dive as deep as you want into the key concepts of learning a language, or you can stay on the simple side of things, but you will get the same result. You will get a better understanding of this new language you're trying to learn. Another small thing to say about this method is that it provides you with an easy way to go and do goal-oriented documentation reading. And I'm not saying that documentation is useless. I'm just saying that if you use it in the right way, that's where you actually gain a lot from this documentation. Now, the last thing I want to say about this method, and that's a bold statement right there. It's fast, it's efficient, and it's fun. I mean, how can I say such a thing? Well, if you take a day or two to learn a new language, or 3 days, or a week, I guarantee you that if you do that while playing a game, you'll just have so much fun, which means that you will have the motivation to do that. And so you will be much more efficient because, as we heard in the previous talk, when we do things that we don't want to do, we're not going to be efficient in doing that, right? So just go out, have fun, play games, and develop. Thank you.